Good morning. Good to see everyone here this morning. We are on our fourth lesson in our study of leadership. So this morning, I want to start off with just a question. I want to get y'all to answer and give me some of your thoughts. Why do we serve others? Why? What are your thoughts? Because we want to help? Okay. Did you have your hand?
And as Christians, that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to be servitude for God and to do in honor of Him and in His name.
That's right. We're commanded to serve. What else? Serving as unto the Lord, yes. Jesus tells us that whatever we've done to the least of these, we've done to Him, and we're doing it as an example for others to see as well. Any other thoughts?
It just makes me feel good.
Okay. It makes us feel good. It does. When we help others, when we serve others. I don't think it's any coincidence or accident or anything like that God wired us that way. That it feels good to help people.
He gave us an example.
He gave us an example of service. Christ gave us that example. We're going to talk about that example this morning. So we're talking about leadership. So why am I talking about service? A lot of times in our world, not as much in more recent days, but a lot of times in our world, the idea of leadership and being a servant seem to be incompatible, or they don't go together. The idea of the commanding boss and the leader over them, and my way or the highway, and this is how things are going to go. In certain circumstances, in certain instances, some of that is required. As you grow in leadership, there's different phases that you go through in an organization and a team, and sometimes you may have to lay down the law, per se. The military especially, there has to be a chain of command, or things fall apart. But that does not mean that leaders can't be servants. The author here makes the point that leadership is service, that you can't have leadership without service. As I mentioned more recently, if you look at the literature that's out there, the writings about leadership, all the different books, you could probably fill an entire bookstore with all the different books over the last 100, 200 years, whatever, that have been written about the idea of leadership. Everybody has their take on it. Everybody has what they want to write on it. But within the last generation or so, or a couple of generations even, there has been a shift into focusing more on this idea of the servant leader. I think it's funny that it's taken our modern culture and secular writing this long to catch up to what Jesus told us 2,000 years ago, that as leaders we need to be servants. But they're catching up to that, and they're getting to that point, and the training and the teaching and the writing and all of that is focusing more on this idea of servant leadership. But even with all of that, there is still this common perception, if you will. We continue to find arrogant leaders who are convinced their authority is, and this is interesting, I thought this was interesting the way the author put this, leaders who are convinced their authority is positional rather than personal. Let me say that again. People who think their leadership is positional rather than personal. That because I'm your boss, you have to respect me. Because I'm the president of this company, you have to respect me. Because I'm a deacon, because I'm an elder, you have to respect me. Now, we as followers, especially in the church, we as followers are commanded to respect our elders. I was referring, not just to elders as the position, but older people in the church as well. We are to respect them. So as followers, we have a responsibility to be respectful of our leaders, whether we always agree with them or not. But as a leader, we will be much more likely to earn that respect if we do the things we need to do to try to earn that respect, to grow as a person, to be a servant, to be a leader, to be humble, all those things we're going to talk about this morning. Yes, we can stand there and say, you have to respect me, you have to follow me because of my position. Same thing as the husbands and wives. You find the husbands who take what Scripture says and basically lord it over their wives and say, I'm in charge here, you listen to me, what I say goes. Instead of leading from a servant attitude, leading from, yes, I'm the leader, but I will help show you the way. I'm not going to tell you the way, I'm going to show you the way, is the idea that we're going to talk about. So let me ask another question. So the author starts this next section by saying, selfishness dominates society. Why do you think, I think I've asked a similar question in a previous lesson, why do you think selfishness is so prevalent in our day and age?
Because people think it's all about them, and they want to have it their way. And you don't have it to where it's the opposite. People just, hey, I'm selfish, I want this, I'm going to get this, It's just how people think today.
I'm going to do what I want.
Yeah, they should be thinking, well, what can I do to help others? Don't be so much focused on myself. Because service comes from the heart. I mean, if you want to do service for the Lord, it should be willfully coming from your heart, anything you do. Selfishness is just bad, man. Because too many people are like that. It's my way or no way, and I want it, and I'm going to get it.
Why are we like that? Why is society... Turned away from God. I think that's interesting, because I think that's also kind of one of those chicken and the egg kind of things. Have we turned away from God because we're so selfish? We don't like the idea of being in the sky, as people will say. This idea that people have of God, this being in the sky telling me what I can and can't do. And that's unfortunately the warped view that people have of God. They see God, they see the idea of God as this arrogant leader. That's what they think. That's the image they have in their mind, this all-supreme being who's going to tell me what I can and can't do, and what I'm allowed to do and what I'm not allowed to do. and miss the fact that that ultimate supreme being in the sky that we've never seen, well, yeah, we have seen him. And he did come here. And he's walked on this earth. And he gave us an example of service. You know, they miss the fact, they think about God the Father up in heaven and don't want to look at God the Son, who emptied himself, became of no reputation, and came here for us. So selfishness prevails. Selfishness dominates. I think we talked about we're kind of wired where serving others makes us feel good. But it's a good feeling for us. It makes us feel good. So is that why we're doing it? Is that why we should be doing it? It's not to say it shouldn't make us feel good, but that shouldn't be our primary goal. That shouldn't be our primary motivation. We have to start thinking about others first.
We have to set the example of Christ living in us.
Amen.
Yeah.
And I believe that we need to also learn to humble ourselves to keep His place.
Humble ourselves. Now y'all are starting to get ahead of me. But I haven't gotten into the scripture yet. Sorry, I'm looking at my notes here. But actually, if you want, let's go ahead and turn to Matthew chapter 22. So, the author here says, you can never lead others when you only care about yourself. No matter how good you are at trying to hide it, no matter how good you are at putting on a show, if your motivations are only about yourself, eventually that will show. And eventually people will see that. And you can never be a successful leader when all you care about is yourself. So how do we get over that? What are some of the things that we have to do? The first is that we have to learn to love. We have to learn to love others. Matthew 22. We'll start in verse 37. Actually, we'll start back in verse 34. But when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? And he said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets. So, the two greatest commandments that we're given are about love. The first is to love God, and the second is to love our neighbor. If you go all the way back to the beginning of the law and you look at the 10 commandments, you can take those 10 commandments and boil it down into one of these two categories. It's either about our relationship with God or our relationship with man. And if we love God and we love our fellow man, then following those 10 commandments will be easy. They'll be natural. Because we won't want to do the things that are being commanded against if we love God and we love our neighbor. So our service to others has to be grounded and motivated by love. This is the part where I read this and I went, ouch. The author here says, if service is not grounded in love, it is mere self-service. I read that like 3 times when I was reading through this. If service is not grounded in love, then it is mere self-service. If we're not doing it because we love those people, we love their souls, we love the church, we love God, we want to do what he wants us to do, it's still got to be about loving those people. It may also be because we love God, because we love the church, because we love the lost in general, because we love our fellow brothers and sisters in Christ. But if it's not about love, it's about, oh, I have to do this because God told me to. Or, oh, I'm just going to do this because it makes me feel good, and it pumps me up and puffs me up a little bit about, oh, look what I'm doing. Look how I'm serving. Then it's no longer about serving. It's about us. It's about selfishness. So we have to be careful about our motivation for why we serve and why we're doing the things that we do. Are we doing it to make ourselves feel good? Only to make ourselves feel good? Are we doing it to for others to see? Are we doing it simply out of obligation? Or are we doing it because we truly love the people that we are serving?
Paul said, if I give all my goods to the poor, and have not love, profit me nothing.
Yeah. 1 Corinthians 13, it starts off talking about that. It's interesting how, it's funny how you can study through this and look through this, and I think of these verses and all of that, and then I get in here in this class and somebody says something, I'm like, well, why didn't I think of that? I didn't even think about 1 Corinthians 13, but that's the perfect example that he gives there. You know, if I speak in the tongues of men and angels, but have not love. There's all these things. Love is so instrumental to all of it, and if that's not our basis, if that's not our foundation, then so much of it can go away. The author here mentions as well, I'll just read what he says here because I think the way he words this is good. It says, even many Christians consider service to others a problem rather than a prospect, an obligation rather than an opportunity. Love means I place value in all other people, even when I disagree with them. If I'm a Republican, I see value in Democrats. If I'm a believer, I see value in atheists. If I'm a leader, I value the contributions of those I lead. The Pharisees were the Jewish group most disagreeable to Jesus. Yet Jesus recognized the positive contributions the Pharisees could make. In fact, Jesus told his followers in Matthew 23, we won't turn in there and read it, Jesus told his followers to listen to them and do what they taught. And he basically said, do what they say, not what they do, is what he says in the context here. But Jesus told his followers to listen to them and do what they taught. Jesus could set aside his personal animosity and recognize the value of the Pharisees' teachings on their own merit. Even if the Pharisees weren't actually following them the way they should, their teachings were still good and still valid. In contrast to the unloving leader who villainizes the opposition and maintains personal grudges, the servant leader locates value in every individual. But this isn't easy. Leadership is about bringing people together, helping people work together. And if we're holding grudges against people, if we're finding ways to divide ourselves, then trying to bring people together is not going to be successful. We need to try to find the common ground. That's the starting place. We need to find value in other people. Even if the only value we can find is you are a soul that God created, and because of that, I love you and want what's best for you. Now, sometimes that's difficult. A lot of times that's difficult to do, especially if it's someone who is being antagonistic toward us. Or a group of people that's being antagonistic toward our beliefs. How do we find that love? How do we find that common ground? Rather than returning hate and anger with more hate and anger. So, the author here gives a quote from a writer. I'm not familiar, Eric Fromm. I'm not familiar with who he is. But it says, love isn't something natural. Rather, it requires discipline, concentration, patience, faith, and the overcoming of narcissism, or we could say selfishness. It isn't a feeling, it's a practice. I think that's where we get messed up. That's where our world gets messed up. I think that's where Hollywood has messed us up a little bit, or a lot, and giving us this distorted view of what love is. That love is this happy, mushy, great all the time feeling. Instead of love being about service. John 15:13, Jesus says, "Greater love has no one than this, than to lay down one's life for his friend." For his friends. The fullest extent of love is self-sacrifice. It's not about how I feel. It's not about what I get out of it. It's about what I do for others. It's about a conscious effort to love. Some people it's easy to love. We get to know them, we talk to them, our spouses, our close friends. They're easy to love. Other people, not so much. I bet it was really difficult for Jesus to love the Pharisees. But he did. I know he did. Because he died for them. Now, whether they accepted that, whether they followed after that, was up to them. But Jesus loved them. And gave us the ultimate example of self-sacrifice. So we talk about love here. But going on from this, I want to ask another question. I want some examples of some adjectives, one or two words, that you would use to describe someone who is a good leader. What are some ways we would describe a good leader? Some adjectives for that.
Someone not unwilling to work themselves.
Okay, they're willing to work.
Chris, one thing we've been, at school, I'm in a leadership class, and a lot of what we're learning about really what comes from. So it's kind of ironic that you said, Christ talked about 2,000 years ago, he's coming back in the workplace, and such as principles or delegating things, and finding value in each person within the school.
And the other thing with that as well, kind of on a tangent, that sometimes we can all be really great listeners, but why are we listening? This is another thing that they talk about in training classes. Are we listening to respond, or are we listening to understand? Most of the time, our gut instinct is we're listening to the other person, and as we're listening to them, we're formulating our response. We're formulating what are we going to say in response, which is not always necessarily a bad thing. But if we're formulating our response in order to tell them that they're wrong, or are we formulating a response to help understand what they're going through, what they're dealing with, whatever it is, understand their concern?
Back to your good leader, I think it comes a lot with the knowledge of what they have to, of what they're trying to teach or learn or do, and the patience of the people around them that they're trying to communicate with to make sure everything is smooth. Knowledge and patience.
Knowledge and patience. Patience of the people you're trying to lead, but the leader has to have patience as well.
Yes.
Anything else?
Good leader has to know how to be a follower first.
There you go.
Because if you do not know how to follow, you can't lead.
Yep.
Good leader has to know. What's that?
A good leader will show us the way, by example.
Good leader shows us the way, gives us an example. All great adjectives, all great ideas here. But a lot of this, especially the idea of listening and patience and all of that, is wrapped up in humility. We mentioned a minute ago. A leader has to be humble. Now, that doesn't mean that a leader is wishy-washy. That doesn't mean that a leader lets people run over them. That doesn't mean that a leader just gives in to everyone else. But it's an attitude of humbleness about themselves. 1 Corinthians 8:1, Paul says, knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. The context here in 1 Corinthians 8 is Paul is talking about the idea of Christian freedom, and specifically the idea of meat sacrifice to idols. And he's talking about, oftentimes in the Greek world and the Roman world that they lived in the places that they would be writing, Corinth was a Greek city. Of course, they were under Roman rule, but they were a Greek city, and they had these temples, and they had these idols that they worshiped, and they would sacrifice meat to the idols, and then they would have these feasts. And so the question was, can Christians participate in these things? And Paul gives the example of you as a Christian. Maybe he's talking to someone who was previously a Jew or had grown up as a Jew and now became a Christian. That person may know that idol is nothing. That idol's not real. It's a statue. It doesn't represent anything real. And so sacrificing this meat to that idol doesn't really mean anything. So why can't I go to the market and buy this meat that was sacrificed to an idol? What problem would that cause? Well, Paul says, what about your brother? What about your brother who has grown up every day seeing that temple and believing that temple represented a god? And now that brother has come to the understanding that that God is not the true God. And now he knows the true God. And that brother now can't bring himself to go and eat that meat sacrificed to that idol because he knows that idol's not true and that it was wrong to sacrifice meat to that idol and to worship that idol. And so Paul says, What if your brother, who is weaker in faith and doesn't have the knowledge that you have, sees you eating meat sacrificed to an idol and it causes him to stumble? We have to be humble about our knowledge, about what we know versus what other people know, versus where we're at in our Christian walk, as opposed to where someone else may be in their Christian walk. And the idea is not about, well, I know this isn't real and I know this doesn't mean anything, so I'm going to do it because I know I can do it, as opposed to, the pronouns in all of those statements that I just said is all about me. Right? I, me. Instead of saying, well, my brother, this could cause him to stumble. And this could be something that blocks his path in growing as a Christian. And so now my focus is no longer on me, my focus is on my brother. My focus is on my sister. My focus is on some other individual that may not even be a Christian. The other example, Paul's focused here on Christians, but what if my neighbor sees me eating this meat sacrificed to idols, and my neighbor knows that I don't worship that idol anymore, that I've found another God that I worship. But why is he still over here at this temple? Why is he buying this food? Why is he participating in this when he doesn't worship this God anymore? He's got another God. Our attitude needs to be of humbleness, not about our knowledge, not about how much we know, not about how good we are, but about love for others. Another thing about humility is it causes us to recognize that we're not always right. We make mistakes. We're human. Leaders, people that lead others, people that have a leadership position, we're not superhumans. There's nothing special or different about us, maybe personality-wise, maybe different things, whatever. Maybe we've worked on things more than others, whatever. But there's nothing special about a leader that makes them any better than any other person. And a true leader recognizes that. Let's skip ahead. There's an example that he gives in a minute here. We're going to read a passage. But he talks about a book written by a man named Simon Sinek. I've seen a couple of videos that this guy has done through leadership classes that I've done in the workplace. Again, a lot of the principles that he talks about and expounds upon are very Christian principles. But in 2014, he wrote a book called Leaders Eat Last. And the primary illustration he uses, I think at the beginning of this book, is based on something from the United States Marine Corps. So we talked in the beginning about how, especially in the military, you need to have this strict chain of command. You need to know who's in charge, who's commanding, who's making decisions. But that doesn't mean that leaders aren't still servants. He talks about this example of the cafeteria custom for the United States Marine Corps, where the most junior officer, the most junior enlisted person there, eats first. And the senior officer, the commander, waits until everyone else has eaten, and then he eats. And it's just a simple example. It's just a simple way of showing, you know what? I value your importance. Even though I'm your commander, even though I may be telling you what to do, I value your importance. And I'm going to let you go first. and you get what you need first. And then when your needs have been met, then I'll take care of myself. I think that's a really powerful example of what we can be as leaders. The third point that the author makes here, before we run out of time, is servant leaders must be willing to be served. Or the other idea is that they have to know how to follow. As Frankie said a minute ago, leaders have to know how to be followers first. The example he gives is Jesus washing the disciples' feet. John 13:14, he says, "If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet." Now, the example is the example of service. He's not, washing a person's feet was a common custom in those days, and it was something that was relegated to the slave of the house, the servant of the house, to do this. It was degrading to have to wash someone's feet. And the creator of the universe took off his cloak, girded his loins, got down on his hands and knees, and washed the feet of the men that in just a few hours would desert him. And he knew that when he did it. But he gave them that example of serving others. And he even told Peter, when Peter tried to say, "Lord, I'm not going to let you wash my feet," Jesus said, "If I don't wash your feet, then you have no part in me." I'd never really thought about the idea of exactly why Jesus tells him that he's trying to get Peter to understand that I'm doing this because I want to serve you, and I'm giving you an example. And if you don't understand this example of service, then you have no part in it. Before we run out of time, Mark chapter 10. We'll start in verse 35. And James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came up to him, that's Jesus, came up to him and said to him, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." Well, first off, that's a pretty bold statement right there. To come up to your leader, your teacher, as they call him, and say, "Hey, we've got a request, do whatever we ask." It's pretty bold to start with. But I think it's Jesus' response is interesting. A lot of times we can get ourselves in trouble when someone comes up and say, "Hey, I need you to do something for me." And most of the time, we want to be helpful, we want to do whatever we can, and so we're like, "Sure, what is it? Whatever you need." And then the person asks, and we're like, I may have a conflict, I don't know how to do that, I don't have the skills to help you with this, whatever the request may be. So we're kind of like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I can't." So Jesus' response here is first, "What do you want me to do for you?" His response is not, "Yeah, sure, okay, whatever." It's, "No, tell me what you want me to do, and then I'll tell you whether I can do it or not." So verse 37, they said to him, "Grant us to sit one at your right hand and one at your left in your glory." Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized?" And they said to him, "We are able." And Jesus said to him, "The cup that I drink, you will drink. And with the baptism with which I am baptized, you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand or at my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared." And when the 10 heard it, they became indignant at James and John. So we've got this conflict here. Two of the apostles here have tried to elevate themselves above the other 10. They've asked for this special place next to Jesus in his kingdom, in his glory, they say. And they've obviously done this. They've gone around the other disciples to get to Jesus and ask him this. And when the other 10 find out, they're like, what are you doing? What about us? And so then Jesus calls them together, verse 42. Jesus called them to him and said to them, you know that those who are considered rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. Sounds kind of like that arrogant leader we were talking about, that my way or the highway type leader. Well, go ahead, Dan. In verse 43, he goes on, but it shall not be so among you. Whoever would be great among you must be your servant. And whoever would be first among you must be slave of all. The first is last, and the last is first. But then verse 45, for even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and give his life as a ransom for many. Again, we have this ultimate example that Jesus gave us of service. James and John, we talked back in the beginning about this idea of authority being, people thinking of authority as positional rather than personal. And so they were looking for that position at the right and the left hand of Jesus. They were looking for that position to give themselves authority. And Jesus says, no, that's not what it's about.
I was just going to mention, I was in a ladies' study one time where we were talking about, so many times when someone's going through a trial or a struggle, we say, well, let me know what we can do for you, or let me know how I can help. But on the flip side of that, are we prepared to do whatever it is that they need? Like, are we willing to make that sacrifice or be that servant to say, anything you need, just let me know?
Yeah, that's a perfect example. When people are in need, James, I know I'm running over here. Sorry, I thought I marked it here. So I can't find it now. I thought, in James, he talks about this idea of we see someone who is in need, and we say to them, go in peace, be warm and filled, but do not give them the things needful for the body. Are we giving lip service? Are we saying, yeah, I'll do whatever you need me to do, and then when it comes down to it, are we really doing it? Do we just jump in when we see a need and say, I'm not even going to ask you if you need anything, I'm just going to do it. Do what I can. Now, we do need to ask as well, because maybe there's some need that we don't recognize and we don't see, but just jumping in and doing it and serving. And again, we're not doing it for the praise, for the glory. We're not doing it just because it feels good. We're doing it because we love those individuals. We love those that we're serving. We're following the example that Christ gave us to be that ultimate servant leader. Sorry for going over again. Thank you for all the comments. Appreciate your input.